The blood on the microphone hadn't dried when the station manager found her body slumped over the soundboard, the on-air sign still glowing red. What began as a routine late-night radio shift for 26-year-old investigative journalist Camille Hart became a murder mystery that shook the small town of Bramble Creek, Oregon, to its core. Camille wasn't just a voice in the dark. She was the voice for the voiceless. After graduating from Northwestern with honors in journalism, she returned to her hometown of Bramble Creek, population 4,912, determined to dig into stories no one else would touch. Her weekly radio segment, Under the Surface, had recently exploded in popularity after she began investigating a cold case involving missing Indigenous women near the Cascade Woods. 3 days before her death, Camille aired a cryptic teaser. What's buried in Bramble Creek isn't just forgotten, it's protected, and someone doesn't want it found. The broadcast cut to static 10 seconds early. Camille was found inside Studio B of KBCM Radio. Her fingers were stained with ink and a single torn page from her notebook had been shoved into her mouth. Scrawled in shaky handwriting across the console in what appeared to be her own blood were the words, "He listens at night." There was no sign of forced entry, no fingerprints besides hers. Her locked laptop was missing. A single earring was found in the corner of the room, not hers. To most, Sheriff Royce was a hometown hero, a Bramble Creek native, a former Marine, and the man who keeps order. But Camille had been quietly digging into reports of missing evidence, altered police logs, and a string of unexplained dismissals within his department. She'd recently submitted a Freedom of Information Act request that Royce had personally denied. According to Royce, Camille had a wild imagination and often got in over her head. The night she died, he claimed to be home alone. No alibi, no witnesses. A janitor, however, reported seeing a man matching Royce's build entering the station's back entrance just after midnight. Danny was Camille's high school boyfriend, now a paranoid, reclusive conspiracy theorist who ran a YouTube channel about government mind control and chemtrails. Camille had featured him on Under the Surface once, but later distanced herself after he began sending her disturbing emails, claiming she was being followed. 2 weeks before her death, Camille filed a restraining order against him, citing stalking behavior and veiled threats. When questioned, Danny said he hadn't spoken to her in over a month, but surveillance footage showed him pacing outside the radio station just hours before her death. A gas station clerk swore he saw Camille arguing with a man in a dark SUV the night before her last show, but couldn't make out his face. A fellow journalist claimed Camille was increasingly paranoid, telling her, "They're watching everything, even this conversation." A homeless man living near the station reported hearing a woman scream shortly after 2 a.m., but dismissed it as another crazy radio stunt. In Camille's apartment, investigators found a series of index cards taped to the wall. Names, dates, locations, red yarn connecting each. At the center was a newspaper clipping. Local girl missing, 1998. 9-year-old Julia Dawson disappears from schoolyard. Julia was never found. Camille's final audio recording, recovered from a hidden flash drive found inside a hollowed-out copy of The Catcher in the Rye, ended with a whisper. "He's here. I have to go." Then silence. 3 weeks after the murder, KBCM Radio aired a chilling, unauthorized broadcast during Camille's old time slot. A male voice, distorted and monotone, spoke only 3 words. "She was right." Then, static. Authorities have no record of anyone accessing the studio. The transmission had lasted less than 4 seconds, but in Bramble Creek, it detonated like a bomb. Listeners flooded 911 with calls. The KBCM switchboard lit up with panicked voices. But when police arrived, the station was empty, the broadcast logs scrubbed clean. And Camille Hart was still dead. Or was she? After the unauthorized broadcast, state investigators took over the case, bypassing Sheriff Royce entirely. A forensic sweep of the radio station uncovered a hidden microphone embedded behind the acoustic paneling, voice-activated and streaming to an unknown external IP address.
Who was listening? Camille's flash drive, previously thought to be her last piece of evidence, had an encrypted partition. After 2 weeks of decryption, digital forensics uncovered 16 audio files, each labeled only with a name. Every name corresponded with an unsolved missing persons case spanning over 2 decades, all within a 60-mile radius of Bramble Creek. At the end of the final file, Camille's voice trembled. They were never missing. They were taken. By the same person. I've seen his face. She didn't say the name. Camille had always believed that the 1998 disappearance of 9-year-old Julia Dawson was the first domino. Hidden inside Camille's closet, investigators found a weathered composition notebook belonging to Julia. It had been mailed anonymously 6 weeks before Camille's death. Postmarked from Eureka, California. One chilling journal entry read, "He makes me stay in the dark. He smells like copper and glue. He says I'm his now." But Julia's body was never recovered. DNA under the postage stamp matched 2 people, Camille Hart and Julia Dawson. Acting on an anonymous tip, state police raided Sheriff Royce's home. In the basement freezer, beneath frozen deer meat, they found a sealed manila envelope containing dozens of Polaroids. Most too degraded to identify, but 5 were instantly recognizable. Each featured Camille, watching someone, following someone, hiding in plain sight. One photo showed her standing outside a gas station at 2:11 a.m., the night she died. The time of death was estimated at 2:16. When agents attempted to re-interview Danny Cobb, he was gone. His home had been emptied, his YouTube channel wiped. But a single USB drive had been left behind in his mailbox, labeled, "For Camille, in case they win." Its contents: drone footage of a remote storage facility deep in the Cascades, timestamped just days before her death. The video zoomed in on a figure entering Unit 19A. Paused at the right moment, the figure's face was visible in the reflection of the truck's window. It was Sheriff Royce, or someone who looked exactly like him. An ex-FBI forensic linguist reviewed Camille's final on-air whisper. "He's here. I have to go." Spectrogram analysis revealed a second, almost imperceptible whisper layered beneath her own, as if another voice had been recorded simultaneously on the same frequency. "You were warned." On the 1-year anniversary of Camille's death, KBCM Radio received a package with no return address. Inside was a cassette tape. No fingerprints, no markings, just a label. Julia, 2025. Authorities have yet to release the contents to the public. But late that night, a janitor at the station reported hearing a girl's voice echo through Studio B, even though no one had entered or exited the building. What did the tape say? That's what they don't want you to know. The truth was never missing. It was buried. When investigators finally played the cassette labeled Julia, 2025, they didn't find a confession. They found a reckoning. The tape begins with ambient noise, a fan, a soft hum, and the slow clicking of what sounds like a chain. Then, a voice, unmistakably that of a young girl, but hoarse and raw. "My name is Julia Dawson. I was taken from my schoolyard in 1998. I'm not dead. Not yet." The voice continues, emotion cracking with every sentence. "He keeps us underground. I wasn't the first. Camille found me. She was close. That's why he stopped her." The last 2 minutes are unintelligible, just the sound of breathing, and then, "He's one of them. He's not the only one." Then the tape ends. The media descended. National headlines called it the Camille conspiracy. Locals no longer trusted anyone in uniform. Sheriff Royce, placed under house arrest pending further investigation, refused to speak. That silence shattered when DNA results came back on the envelope with the Polaroids. The blood smeared on it was a match to Camille Hart, fresh within 48 hours of delivery. But Camille had been dead for nearly a year. Or had she? The drone footage led authorities to the isolated unit in the Cascades. Buried behind rusted fences and overgrown brush, what they found inside was worse than imagined. Dozens of metal lockers, soundproofing foam, a rusted medical table, and 7 locked filing cabinets, each labeled with a year: 1998, 2002, 2006, 2010. Inside were files, each with a name, photo, and a detailed surveillance timeline, notes on movement, school routes, family disputes, medical histories. Victims, all missing children, some officially documented, others never reported. And in the 2024 drawer, Hart, Camille, Stage 3 observation, Handwritten beside it, "Too close. Terminate. Sheriff Royce's alibi unraveled." Forensic scans of his home computer showed a folder hidden behind a firewall labeled Echo Archives. Inside were dozens of audio clips, doctored recordings from Camille's broadcasts, her voice spliced to create different narratives. Someone had been fabricating broadcasts posthumously to mislead the public. And then came the most damning evidence. A photo dated June 3, 2025, taken by a trucker along Route 38. A woman, thin, bruised, but unmistakable, standing at a rest stop, looking directly into the camera. Camille Hart. She was alive. On June 16, 2025, exactly 1 year since the first broadcast, a live message interrupted every frequency on KBCM radio at precisely 2:16 a.m. Camille's voice, strong, unedited. "I was never missing. I was hunted, and I'm not the only one. If you're hearing this, they've already lost control." The broadcast ended with 3 tones. Morse code. Translated, it reads, "Unit 7 alive. In the woods outside Bramble Creek, a child in tattered clothes stumbles toward the highway, blinking in the headlights of a passing car. The driver slams the brakes. The child presses a bloody hand to the windshield. When the truth breaks free, it doesn't knock. It shatters." The voice hadn't come from a recording. At precisely 2:16 a.m., Camille Hart spoke live across KBCM's frequency. Her tone steady, her words damning. Within minutes, authorities rushed to trace the source. But the broadcast hadn't originated from the station. It came from a relay tower deep in the Cascades, where no signal should have been active. When investigators arrived at the site, they found the relay station door open, still swinging. Inside, a single red thumb drive jammed into the broadcast console, a trail of muddy footprints, and a message scrawled in black marker on the wall. "Unit 7 breached. They're awake." Over the next 72 hours, 3 more children, long declared missing, surfaced in different parts of the Pacific Northwest. Malnourished, terrified, each whispered the same name when questioned. Camille. None remembered how they escaped. All bore the same tattooed mark on the inside of their left arm, a tiny frequency wave etched in bruised skin. Meanwhile, the FBI quietly detained Sheriff Royce after confirming his DNA matched several pieces of evidence recovered from the lockers in Unit 19A. But Royce refused to answer questions. In fact, he refused to speak at all. That is, until Camille walked into the interrogation. She was thinner, changed, but undeniably alive. Dressed in borrowed clothes, hair cropped short, she met Royce's empty gaze with dead certainty. "You tried to erase me," she said, voice a whisper laced with rage. "But I became the static." Royce blinked once, then leaned forward and spoke his first words in weeks. "You weren't supposed to wake them. You don't know what you've done." Before agents could react, he bit down on something hidden in his cheek. By the time they pried open his mouth, the cyanide capsule had already taken effect. That night, a strange anomaly hit every frequency tied to KBCM. Not static, not a message. Tone, shield. A long, low pulse that triggered seizures in 3 listeners and caused nearly a dozen more to complain of auditory hallucinations. Hearing children crying through their speakers. Technicians traced it back to a frequency Camille had once investigated. A defunct military band. Its file name in the system. Project Black Signal Active. Camille, reviewing the file, turned pale. "This isn't a leak," she murmured. "It's a signal. It's calling them." At sunrise, a ranger hiking the outer edges of the Cascades found an abandoned van, engine running. Inside, a blood-soaked map. Photos of Camille. Dozens of names. One circled over and over in red ink. Julia Dawson. Pinned beside it a Polaroid fresh, sharp. Julia, alive, standing in a room lined with radio equipment. Her eyes fixed directly at the camera. Her mouth stitched shut, and on the back of the photo, written in ink still wet. "She never left. Neither will you." Some voices weren't lost. They were muted. By dawn, the photo of Julia Dawson, alive mouth stitched shut, surrounded by radio gear, had reached the FBI task force. Camille Hart, now under federal protection, insisted on accompanying the agents to the facility she believed the photo was taken in. An abandoned Cold War signal bunker marked on the blood-stained map from the van. They found it exactly where the map said, buried beneath 3 feet of moss, cement, and silence. Inside, rows of rusted control panels blinked unexpectedly. The bunker still had power, and it had been used recently. On the far wall, scrawled in red paint, were 2 words, "Signal keeps." As they moved deeper, the agents uncovered a surveillance room. Hundreds of tapes, each labeled with a child's name, some going back to the early 80s. They were watching them, training them, broadcasting to them. Before there were victims, there was a voice, and someone chose to listen. Camille stood frozen, her reflection warping in the curved glass tank. The child inside, her double, floated motionless. A nest of wires wrapped around her scalp like a crown of thorns. Her lips moved slightly, though no sound escaped. One trembling hand clutched the blood-smeared cassette. Broadcast 6, the original signal. A nearby monitor flickered to life. Grainy black and white footage played. A lab, mid-1980s. Scientists observing a girl, Julia Dawson, just 6 years old, repeating phrases into a microphone. Her voice fed through a signal filter. The audio glitched and looped. Test subject, J.D.01. Project codename, Echo. Status, stable, transmission capable. The tape wasn't just a recording. It was the first signal, the one that started it all. Suddenly, the cassette player in the corner of the tank room activated itself. Click. The tape began to roll. If you're hearing this, it means they never stopped. My name is Dr. Henry Arlen. I created the frequency protocol. I thought it would help deaf children here. I didn't know what the military would do with it. They built echo units, human transmitters, children tuned to frequencies. Julia was the prototype. Camille was built from the feedback. You're not the first, but if you're hearing this, you might be the last. Camille staggered backward. Built from the feedback? Her thoughts raced. What did that make her? She looked back at the child in the tank. The girl opened her eyes and whispered, perfectly synced with Camille's own voice. They're listening now. She whispers, is Camille safe now? Fade to black. And then Camille saw it, a live feed. Room 7. A girl pacing inside, face partially hidden. But when the girl turned to the camera and stared straight into the lens, Camille dropped to her knees. It was Julia, and she wasn't alone. A second girl stood behind her, same eyes, same jawline. Identical, but colder. Still, the file beside the feed read, Subject, JD Echo 2. Designation, Broadcast Host Replacement. Camille stared at the screen. They didn't just take Julia, they replicated her. The agents scrambled to trace the feed's location, but the system looped every signal into a recursive burst, encrypting it with a key known only as black signal. Just then, the feed froze, static, and a tone. A message appeared on every screen in the bunker. Camille Hart accessed restricted system. Activating protocol, cleanse. 10 seconds later, the bunker doors locked. Above ground, the world began to notice. KBCM's frequency erupted again. Not in words, but screams. Hundreds of them. A layered, overlapping chorus of voices crying out, repeating a phrase Camille once wrote in her journal. We are the silence, and we remember. At 2:16 a.m., all emergency broadcast systems across Oregon activated on their own. The message was simple. The echo is in the signal. Do not listen. But people did. And those who did began reporting hallucinations. Visions of shadowy rooms, radio towers burning, and the same face staring back through their mirrors. Julia's. Back in the bunker, Camille found a final door, heavily bolted, its keypad glowing. The screen flickered once, then displayed a new message. Input. Voice code original source. Camille hesitated. Then she stepped up to the mic. "I'm Camille Hart," she whispered. The lock disengaged with a loud hiss. The door creaked open. Inside was a narrow corridor leading to a glass room. Floating in a tank, a child, unconscious, her head wired to transmitters. She looked exactly like Camille, and in her hand, she was holding a bloody cassette labeled Broadcast 6, the original signal, back at KBCM's remains, now burned and evacuated. A private satellite feed transmitted from an unlisted source. The feed showed a new structure, massive, obsidian, humming like a tuning fork, rising from deep within MT Rainier's northern face. Inside its command center, a man stood watching Camille on a wall of screens. He wore a badge that read, Arlen E., Project Director, Black Signal. He turned to a woman in military fatigues. "Broadcast 6 is active," he said. "Initiate global calibration. Begin wideband replication. The echo must evolve." The woman nodded. "And the girl?" He smiled faintly. Camille was never the story. She was the transmission medium. The story begins with what comes next. Back in the tank room, the child, Camille's double, suddenly let out a deafening scream. The monitors exploded into static. Camille fell to her knees, clutching her ears. From the static, one voice cut through, clear and mechanical. "Unit 0 has breached. The signal is no longer contained." Sirens blared. Emergency lights pulsed red. The final image on the screen. Dozens of children in hospital gowns, marching through the dark tunnels beneath the mountain, guided by a radio tower beacon pulsing in time with their footsteps. The signal had become flesh. They were never missing. They were remastered. At 3 o'clock hours, satellites above the Pacific Northwest detected sudden power surges across a network of decommissioned relay towers. Simultaneously, emergency systems in 5 states triggered false nuclear alerts, each message carrying the same voice. "We are awake. We are tuned. We are the frequency now." Camille Hart escaped the tank room seconds before it was sealed shut by automated lockdown protocols. Her clone, still inside, vanished beneath rising fluid as alarms blared, but not before whispering a final message to Camille through the glass. "Find Julia. She's the transmitter. I'm the key." Outside the bunker, the children from Unit 0, clad in tattered gowns, their eyes blank but focused, moved with eerie synchronicity toward the dormant relay towers. Each wore a headset built from scavenged tech, and each repeated the same chilling chant through their speakers. "Repeat, resend, rebuild." Director Everett Arlen monitored the activation of all towers in the region. He hadn't expected Unit 0 to coordinate independently. Worse, the central command node, known as the Chorus, had gone dark. "Who gave them access to the command band?" he shouted. No one answered. Then a new transmission hijacked every secured channel in Black Signal. "You taught us how to speak. Now hear us scream." Every tower began emitting the original frequency, but inverted, not just heard, but felt. Cities across the West Coast experienced localized blackouts, thousands falling into sudden catatonia. Scientists called it a mass neurological event. Camille called it something else. "The children aren't attacking," she whispered to an agent beside her. "They're sinking." Deep inside the Black Tower, in a sealed radio chamber, Julia Dawson, alive, barely human, sat strapped to a vertical transmitter throne. Her mouth, once sewn shut, was now wired open. A mechanical device modulated her voice, pulsing it through the tower's massive antenna. She no longer blinked. She no longer wept. She simply broadcasted. A technician in the room hesitated before adjusting a dial. "Are you sure we should amplify it?" "She's already at critical. BZZT. I wasn't built to break." Julia's voice cracked through the speaker. Clear, deliberate, defiant. "I was built to bring everyone in." And with a single blinding pulse, all the children stopped moving. Then, slowly, perfectly timed, they turned their heads toward the sky, eyes glowing, tuned.